Hello, it's Crystal Beshara here, and I'm an artist and illustrator, and I'm based out of Eastern Ontario, Canada, and I have been working as a professional in the field for over 25 years. In this video, I want to show you some really simple tips to improve your fur texture and to add a little bit of realism to your next coloring page. As an arts educator, I share a lot of watercolor tips with you here on my channel, but today I want to show you how we can use some of those same concepts to improve your coloring. Now, we know that alcohol markers tend to bleed a little bit, and like watercolor, that means that some of our layering and glazing process has to be done while that marker is still active. I'm using a character from my own adult coloring book, The Tea Time Tales. This is Lady Harriet O'Hagish, and we're going to color her together here. So we're using some of the same concepts of working light to dark and big to small. I'm using 4 colors here, and all of the description for the exact colors that I'm using on this particular subject are going to be listed in the description box below. So like watercolor painting, I want to use the biggest tool possible for the shape. So in this case, I'm using the chisel tip for coloring in all of the largest areas, and I'm starting with a nice caramel color. And once I get to the finer points, I want to use the tip of my marker to just color in, sometimes placing the tip right in the smallest corner of the stroke and working my way with light wispy strokes inward from the outer shape. Of course, I'm always testing my marker on a test strip, just like I do in watercolor on another sheet of paper. It's usually just the cardstock that I have underneath my coloring book so that the colors don't bleed through. So here I'm using a slightly darker brown color, and I'm really focusing on capturing shadow that would be underneath any clumps of hair. Luckily, in this coloring book that I've just created, most of my characters have very strong fur lines. And if you're just starting out with coloring and you're not an artist yourself, this is a really nice way to introduce you to the movement and the fur texture. I like to make sure that my strokes follow the kind of direction of a wave, or I imagine almost like brushing my animal with a brush. Now I'm using that same caramel color you can see here while that darker brown was still wet. And this will allow me to blend the colors and the strokes together before it sets completely. Also, that second layer of color, even though it's the same color, using it twice in this fashion actually deepens the effect of the marker stroke. So it looks like I'm using a darker color here, but it's just a second layer. So again, using that knowledge of watercolor to build glazes and create a little bit more depth in the fur. So once again, just focusing underneath what I visualize as protrusions, anything that extrudes out of and away from the body of the animal. So underneath the jawline, underneath the chin, anything that recedes the pockets of the ear or fur that's curling underneath the body, all of that can take on a nice darker layer. Here I am using a little bit more of a orangey hue, and that's just to give our Highland cow a little bit more of a coppery glow. Notice that with the waves, I'm keeping the highlights clear, so that initial base of color, I'm keeping that exposed. I'm not covering it up. So I'm being quite sensitive to anywhere that I think might catch the light. Now our light source, I'm kind of imagining it for the most part being located in the upper left-hand corner of the page. So a lot of the right-hand side of the animal is going to take on a little bit of extra shadow. Notice here, for instance, where I'm pulling the strokes upward, and that allows the marker to kind of taper. Underneath this flower, I'm pulling the strokes downward to cast a little bit of a shadow and have those strokes taper softly into the highlights of the underpainting, or that first layer of marker. So eye sockets around the jaw, around the nose, you might find that you want to build a little bit more depth. So always starting your stroke against the shadowy part of the shape and pulling towards the highlight. I'll say that again because that's a really important tip. Always starting your stroke against the darkest part of the shape and pulling out and upward as it moves towards the lighter portion of the shape. So just continuing to build any darker pockets. And then eventually I can just start blending these shapes a little bit together, either using the orange or a third layer of that initial kind of caramel color. It's important to introduce multiple colors, not just different values, meaning darks, mediums, and lights, but truly different colors. It could even be grays, oranges, purples, browns, eggplant colors. This is what really adds dimension to the fur. This brings a little bit of a glow to our animal. Now again, remembering that we've got highlights on the left-hand side, we can finish things off once the marker has set with a few fun strokes. I'm using a white gel pen, but you can certainly use an opaque pale yellow or a lighter version of the fur that you're working in. Focusing on the highlights where they're in the middle and they're catching the light in any curved areas of your subject. So for me, I'm really just looking at making some of those middle sections where the light might catch an edge or a curve and really trying to make those pop up a little bit. I think Harriet's looking wonderful. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. This is one of my first coloring book videos. So if you like this and you found this very informative, I would love for you to hit the subscribe button, hit a like, and definitely check out my brand new coloring book that has just been released. It's available on Amazon. Thanks for watching, everybody. Stay tuned for more Tea Time Tales.